7 on the
Hopefully.
clock.
Okay, it says we're live, so we should be able to be seen. Hey, same thing every week. We
Every
go,
week,
yeah. Hey,
we are
2 minutes.
live.
We are live, right?
We're live. We're
Okay,
boomer coded as hell.
okay. It's very on brand. Yeah. Okay, we wait 2 minutes and then we start.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
I think all things considered, we're doing great because the first few weeks we were 13 minutes late, 9 minutes late, like a few minutes late, and now we're ready at 59.
It's
It's progress.
I think so too. I think we made it. We made it. Okay.
Okay, we have a few people on already. And 7 p.m.
7 p.m. Okay. Hello, and welcome back to the broadcast, to the show, everybody. Habibis, Habibtis, and Habib and Bees. We are live again, Exchained. We're here with
Our very
our
good friend and comrade, Dr. Jonathan Fluxman, who we're so honored. We're so honored that I had to interrupt Karam to.
just take it away.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today and have an extremely important conversation with an organizer, and also someone who I look at as a really wonderful role model, having just gotten to know really in the last month or so. But Jonathan and I organized together. He's a doctor. I'll let him go on to introduce himself. But yeah, we want to talk about the healthcare system. Healthcare under genocide is our kind of broad umbrella topic. But more than that, we want to dig into Jonathan's experience, which has been extremely rich in breadth and topic, and taken place over many decades. So yeah, Jonathan, would love to hand it over to you to give a little bit of an intro to yourself, your background and your organizing history to begin with.
Thanks so much, guys. Karam and Rachel, it's such a pleasure to see you guys again. It was lovely to meet you on our trip to Berlin recently. And a real pleasure and privilege to be here with you today. Yes, so, all right, just a brief potted history of where I grew up and what I've done in my early part of my life, perhaps. So I'm South African, as you can probably hear from my accent, born and brought up in Johannesburg. Was not really politically involved very much in the anti-apartheid struggle inside South Africa. I should just say my father was a lawyer. We lived in the rich white suburbs of Johannesburg under apartheid, and I have benefited enormously from that privilege in my life, being able to qualify as a doctor and go to university and have opportunities that the great majority of South Africans were denied, obviously, under apartheid. So in the middle 70s, in fact, after the Soweto uprisings in 1976, and people may remember that that was a nationwide protest by school children, essentially, against the imposition of Afrikaans, the language of the oppressor, really, in South Africa. Although the mixed race community in South Africa does speak Afrikaans as well, so not entirely so. And they went out and protested and were met with just extreme brutality, and hundreds of students were murdered in cold blood, just shot down in the street. And it was a shockwave that went through South Africa, and I think globally. It was worldwide news. And really, that was the beginning of the end of apartheid. I mean, it took a long time after that, but that was a real seminal moment in the history of our country. So my family left South Africa a year later, and I was in the middle of medical school and then joined them here in the UK about 6 months after they'd left. And then soon after I arrived, I discovered the anti-apartheid movement office in central London, walked through the door, and suddenly understood what apartheid was all about and how racism and colonialism are there to oppress indigenous people, to extract profits for both the local rulers, if you like, and their colonial backers back in the metropoles of the West and the US. I finished medical school, did my junior doctor training, and then went to work for about 3 years in Southern Africa, in Angola with the ANC. And that was the time when the sort of struggle against apartheid had reached great heights, and it was clear that it was going to be real soon that the apartheid regime fell, as it did very soon after that. And then Mandela came out of jail, I think, in 1990, and there were the first democratic elections in 94, electing an ANC government. And we, if you like, successfully brought an end to racial supremacy in South Africa, which was encoded in statute, in acts of parliament by the white minority government. Unfortunately, lots of other issues were not addressed, and the economic situation in the country is still not good for the great majority of the population.
Understood. Yeah, look, thank you for the background, and I think this leads into a couple of the topics that we wanted to lay out. So in preparing for this, something that we had discussed was really going back to the basics to arm people with the arguments, in regardless of where they are in their politicization or activism journey. And so something we wanted to discuss in relation to BDS, in relation to Jonathan's experience in South Africa and in the fight against apartheid there, kind of the fundamental, the foundation around why is criticizing Israel not anti-Semitic, and in comparison to the BDS struggle and how BDS was used in South Africa, how we can kind of use that experience and use that politically in order to debunk this main Zionist narrative that's being weaponized against us. So maybe that's a bit of a dramatic turn, but I think that's where we want to kind of dive in.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Really two questions there. So if I can sort of deal with the BDS aspect in South Africa first, and then perhaps move on to the question of anti-Zionism. So yes, so people will know that the sanctions campaign against the apartheid regime, the boycott campaign of South African goods, was a very important part of the struggle for freedom inside South Africa. Just as Palestinians are calling for BDS against Israel, the black majority in South Africa, through the ANC, United Democratic Front, and other mass organizations and trade unions, also called for an international boycott, because people understood very clearly that these colonial regimes depend on their imperialist backers for their maintenance. And nothing could be clearer than in Israel. If there wasn't the air bridge between the US and Germany in the main, and other European countries shipping in weapons, money, you name it, to support the Zionist colony, they would have gone a long, long time ago. So in South Africa, the same applied, but I think to a lesser extent. The comparisons are quite interesting, actually. In the late 70s, by the late 70s, for example, South Africa was an international pariah. Israel is heading in that direction, and it has become, in my view, that. But taking action against Israel has been more difficult, I think, because of the complete 100% backing that it's had from Western powers. Whereas in South Africa, they did do it, but they did it secretly behind closed doors and so on. You know, Thatcher and Reagan opposed sanctions against South Africa, but were forced to impose them in the late 80s, in fact. But, you know, civil society was 100% behind the liberation struggle, and the apartheid became rightly a swear word, and, you know, the whole world was against them. So campaigning was certainly easier. But I just want to add a note of caution. It wasn't the deciding factor. And sometimes people outside South Africa would speak of, oh, it was the most important thing. And that's not the case. You know, always in liberation struggles, to my mind, is the struggle inside the country is the determining factor. And the trade unions in particular in South Africa were very strong and very well organized. COSATU was the umbrella organization, and they were very mobilized. And civil society was very mobilized also under an organization called the UDF, the United Democratic Front. And that mass action, together with trade union mobilization, meant, you know, that apartheid's days were numbered. And that's ultimately what brought the regime to the negotiating table and did away with things. Now, the situation in Palestine is obviously a lot more complicated and different, and I don't profess to be an authority at all on Palestinian trade unions, but we know that they've made similar calls for solidarity and boycott and so on. The dynamics inside the country are different. Also because, you know, in South Africa, we were very fortunate. We had the frontline states of Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Angola, Zambia, and even as far north as Tanzania, supporting the ANC, housing refugees, housing the armed wing of the ANC, which was training in some of these countries. Whereas in the Middle East, in Palestine, the frontline states there are all client vassal states of the US and unfortunately behind the Zionist regime.
So can I ask, like, how do you put more importance on BDS in the context of Palestine, considering that in South Africa in the apartheid in South Africa, there was a kind of dependence of the apartheid state itself on the working class, on the exploitation of, like, South African black workers, whereas in Palestine, this has been completely shifting throughout the years. There has been less and less Palestinians working inside of historic Palestine and like right now, since the 7th of October, we've been seeing also an influx of Indian workers as a way to kind of limit or restrict the power that the working class, the workers in Palestine, Palestinian workers, have to effect this apartheid state. Like, would you put more emphasis on BDS in the context of Palestine?
This is, by the way, the exact question that I was going to ask, with just the last bit being because the character is different, also because of the aspect of ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism, where they are looking to replace the indigenous people rather than specifically exploit them. So I'm interested in that as well.
No, great question, guys. You know, absolutely, the if you like, nature of the settler colonial state in Israel is shifting, I think, and it has been different throughout. It has been an ethnic cleansing process, and now has become a genocide, obviously, an overt genocide. One could argue that it was a genocide in slow motion, which I think is the right way of describing it ever since 48. And yes, they've always wanted to shift the demographics and have more Israelis than Palestinians in that part of the world, so that they could, you know, make sure that they won the elections. the colonizers. And as you say, Karam, the number of workers who are actually working in 48 Palestine, the moment is very few, or much less than before. So in answer to your question, is BDS more important? I hadn't actually thought of it in that context, but I think the answer is yes, because Israel is so dependent, and we've seen it so clearly. Like I was saying a minute ago, the air bridge with the weapons, for example, all the political cover, the diplomatic machinations of chiefly America, but also Europe, of course, and our country here in Britain, have been absolutely essential to keep them going. Without that support, it would have collapsed a long time ago because of the pressure of the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian people. So I think BDS is really, really important. And what underlines it for me is the hysterical reaction of Israelis and the Israeli regime to any attempt to isolate them, to criticize them, and so on. They go to extraordinary lengths to frustrate campaigns to criticize them and isolate them. The Hasbara campaign has been very successful, and it has been invested, I would say, probably billions of dollars by now over the last how many decades. And a principal part of that is to defend Israel internationally. Its international reputation is extremely important to it. And there's a strata of society in Israel, the upper echelons, the doctors, the high tech, the guys who work in tech, in surveillance and biotech in particular. That strata, they depend upon the international connections to publish papers and promote their products and their initiatives, carry on research and so on and so forth. And that's why, and we're probably going to come onto this, I think, in the discussion, the Health BDS campaign in particular, I think, offers great promise, but I think it should be across the board, all professions, all occupations, all international organizations should be included.
And this is something I think, this just brings up for me in my, what I've looked at within the finance industry, actually, and in the investment industry, because Israel does rely also so heavily on this kind of reputation of being like a source of innovation and tech startups and this and that, and they rely therefore on all these investment firms who come in with their capital and funnel it in. And at this moment, or in the last 15 months, where there has been significant doubt around whether that's physically safe to do, whether it's legal, whether it's a good investment in these kinds of good investment as in a safe investment in this kind of environment, you really have seen the economy suffering. And this, I think, is also somewhere where we should be digging in. Like JP Morgan pulled out something like 70% of its investments. I might be misquoting the number, but earlier last year in all of Israel. And it was in one of the weapons delivered. Anyway, it was some really, really big divestment from JP Morgan, which is one of the world's largest banks. And you see that reflected in society, and you also see that reflected in how they respond with the propaganda. I read that in the last few weeks, there's been like a 50 million Hasbara investment, which is absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah, for sure.
You also see it you also see it not just on a corporate level. You also see it on a governmental level. We've had in Germany, we have like new anti-Semitism resolutions that are specifically there to target any form of BDS, to kind of frame BDS as inherently anti-Semitic, which is like, it begs the question: is the boycott of the apartheid regime in South Africa, was it racist against whites? It's silly if you think about it, but still it gets pushed on a state level. We have in the US, we've had I think like right now it's 36 states where if you want to work as a public in the public sphere, you have to sign that you will never call for a boycott of Israel. And we've seen also, I think Jonathan, you know a little bit more about this, the anti-Corbyn campaigns in 2017, I think, where like it became just the height, like a peak of actual cancel culture based on fraudulent accusations of anti-Semitism, and led in the end to the isolation of Jeremy Corbyn. And what we have in the end now in Keir Starmer is, let's say, a very weak, kind of not smart human rights lawyer. If he can claim to be a human rights lawyer, that
That's
cannot even
generous.
he can't even name genocide. Like, it's weird.
No, for sure. That's one definition of Starmer I haven't heard before. There are many others.
Yeah.
No, but Starmer is an avowed Zionist. He said so. He said as much. So I don't think we should be under any illusions. I just wanted to go back just for a second to the South African situation and your very relevant point, Karam, about the dependency of the white regime on the black working class. Because, of course, that was the whole purpose of the apartheid system. And what you had, just to explain, is you had male workers housed in hostels with their families separated, having to live hundreds of miles away in the Bantustans. And this was the model for the South African economy: cheap indentured labor, which was held hostage, really, housed in very poor conditions, paid badly, and exploited to the max. Now, those workers, as a result of years and years of organizing, became very well organized and politicized. You know, the political program of the ANC just before the fall of apartheid was very clear: was nationalize the mines, the banks, land distribution, redistribution, and so on. You know, and so you had a big group of workers who were organized and mobilized, and that would have brought down the regime quite soon after, had they not negotiated a settlement. So just to jump then to this question of Zionism and so on. I'm sorry, I should have said a lot earlier. I am Jewish too. I'm a member of the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, which is an international group of, as the name says, anti-Zionist Jews in, how many countries are we now, Rachel? 6 or 7?
Yeah, somewhere in that direction, and expanding.
And I'm very pleased and proud to be part of that organization, because I think it offers the clearest explanation of what Zionism is, how important it is to oppose it as a Jew and for non-Jews. And I think our voices as Jews denouncing Zionism is very important. It's not more important than Palestinian voices, of course, but I think because the Zionists always say all Jews support Zionism, all Jews support Israel, therefore if you criticize either of them, you are anti-Semitic. That is the game that they play. And it's just simply nonsense. If we take Zionism, for example, right? Here in Britain, there was a case won a couple of years ago. Professor David Miller in Bristol, he was sacked from his job at the university because he was professing anti-Zionist views. He won the case, and now anti-Zionism is recognized as a protected belief in this country under the Equality Act.
Okay.
Of course, it's under appeal by the usual suspects, and they're going to be pouring in money and lawyers to try and overturn that. But the great news is David Miller's crowdfunding appeal in about a week raised £75,000. It was amazing. So everybody's watching the case. we're all going to fight tooth and nail to defend that because it's important. So that's one reason. So the law, as it stands at the moment in Britain, at least protects you. Secondly, Zionism has been around for about 140 years as a political ideology. Judaism is thousands and thousands of years old. And to pretend that somehow Zionism is part of the Jewish religion is just absolute rubbish. It's weaponizing, trying to weaponize the religion to support the political program of Zionism, right? So how can it be anti-Semitic on those grounds? It is only 140 years old. And the other important point is it's a political ideology. It is not a religion. It is not a people, okay? And as you said, Karam, when we criticized apartheid, white South Africans were not bleating that you're being racist against them. It's the most ridiculous thing to conceive of. And similarly, when you criticize Israel, a country, it's not anti-Semitic, like criticizing South Africa under apartheid, a country, was not racist against white South Africans in that regard either. Furthermore, not all Jews are Zionists, as I've said. Many, many more of us, I think, are becoming anti-Zionist, especially in the US, as we see the horrors of genocide and the mask being stripped away of what has been going on in Palestine for the last 76 years. More and more people are saying, this is not in my name, not in my name. We are not part of this. And on the converse, most Zionists are actually not Jews. There are 30 million Christian Zionists in America, for example, in America alone. So you tell me how that adds up to the charge of being anti-Semitic if you criticize Zionists. What they are saying is you cannot criticize what we are doing as Zionists in Palestine, in Israel, whatever they want to call it. And we will weaponize anti-Semitism to stop you saying that.
Yeah.
It also extends, sorry, just to finish, to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which the document itself says has no legal standing. And some of the examples quoted in the document are correct, but some of them are not correct. Like they say, criticizing Israel as a state is anti-Semitic, or comparing it to the Nazis is anti-Semitic, or saying that it's a racist endeavor from the get-go. Well, of course it's a racist endeavor. Zionism is an exclusive Jewish supremacist code. They call it their code for self-determination of the Jewish people. Yeah, predicated upon the ethnic cleansing and murder and seizing of Palestinian land. That's not the right to self-determination. Again, it's a perverted, twisted interpretation of principles of democracy and support for people, oppressed people, which they have adopted and turned into this genocidal ideology.
I think this is so powerful, and this also struck me in thinking about the comparison with South Africa, because of course we laugh at the thought of people looking at white South Africans and saying, oh, you're being racist against white South Africans for insisting on the fall of apartheid. But here, they've instrumentalized the narrative in such, I mean, I want to say a clever way, but they're not clever. But what they look at as a clever way, because they've taken a minority, they've taken a previously genocided minority, and they've utilized them, and they've created this functionality out of them to that end. And something that I read, which was really interesting, actually, was, I believe, I don't remember who it was, but an older anti-Zionist Jew talking about having grown up Zionist and then having opened his eyes and realized the situation that we're in, and that anything having to do with Israel and Zionism is, exists and is predicated on the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians. And then, of course, being called a self-hating Jew. But really, when you see the ways in which Zionists have functioned in society, you see how deeply they hate themselves, because you see how deeply they bought into this narrative of you can't be part of the society that you're in. The only way that you can survive is to go elsewhere and to go, take land from someone else, but to be transplanted from Europe. And as a result, not be part of the societies that Jews spent so many hundreds and thousands of years actually trying to integrate into. So I think it's a really important point. It's also for me personally, very, very gratifying and very powerful to hear this from you. We have certainly in Germany very few anti-Zionist elders, and that's not to call you old. That's just to say that there are very few of us over the age of like 35 because of the nature of Jews having been thrown out of Germany in a story that we're all familiar with. So really appreciative of getting to hear this from you and your perspective.
Thanks, Rachel. No, and I think it's the right perspective. And your point about abandoning their homes and going to Palestine as the salvation, it negates the whole history of Jewish resistance to anti-Semitism over hundreds, if not thousands of years, right across Europe. There were people who fought back, and the Zionists erased that from our history, because that means that people wanted to stay. They wanted to stay in Russia and Poland and Lithuania and so on, which my grandparents come from, right? Not to uproot themselves and go to another country, which meant dispossessing people of their land. But what's really interesting, having done that, right, having forsaken the countries that they were born in on this false dream that they've been sold of Zionism, they now, having established this illegal state and having caused so much death and destruction and misery in Palestine, if you look at them now, what are they doing? They're desperate to get back into Europe. They're in the Eurovision Song Contest. They're in the European football, right? In all the international organizations. What region of the organization are they in? Europe. If you take the WHO, Israel is in the Europe region. If you take the Family Doctors Organization internationally, they're in the Europe region, right? Whereas Lebanon to the north, Jordan to the east, and Egypt to the southwest are all in the Mediterranean region in all of these organizations. So they see themselves.
Wait, I have a question though. Do you see that though as being part of this kind of hierarchy between Ashkenazi Sephardic and, was that what you were going to ask, and Mizrahi Jews, a kind of a racist, a matter of like racism within Judaism, or part of, I don't know, part of some kind of feeling, I don't even know how to phrase it, of having been thrown out of Europe and wanting to come back with the validate, which I guess comes back to kind of a racist core anyway. What do you see that as being attributable to?
I think it's fundamentally racist, but it shows them up for the liars they are. They keep saying how indigenous they are to Palestine. Right? But then why do you want to be in all the European things? The logic is, no, then you're part of the Middle East, Mediterranean regions of all these organizations internationally. And if you look at it from the other angle, this is what other comrades are saying, is the international organizations themselves are aiding and abetting the settler colonial status of the country, because they are recognizing the settler colony as part of a Europe endeavor. And this is the other thing I'm coming to learn, that these international organizations who have all these aims and ethos of health for all and so on and so forth are governed by exactly the same power relations as the United Nations, as the West being dominant in all of the international rules-based order, and so on. The international organizations, unfortunately, are the same. However, I would say, and this is very important, the global South countries are much more numerous, and I think with time and effort and mobilizing and campaigning, they are much more likely to support sanctions, boycott, etc., against Israel because of their own colonial experience. They know very well, and this is why the entire world, apart from the Western elites, back the Palestinians. Part of the reason, anyway. It's only, they speak, the Western elites, that, nobody supports Israel. We're all in favor of Israel. No. Just you lot in government and in the elites that are backing that awful regime. The rest of the world despises what they are doing and cannot wait for the day that it comes to an end.
I was gonna say it's the fact that Israel is in the Western Europe sphere when it comes to football and other organizations on a global scale is very symbolic to the endeavor, to the settler colonial endeavor itself. While it does not have a classic metropole like we expect in, like we see in other settler colonies like the US or New Zealand or Australia, it still has a kind of a connection to the place where the settler colonial ideology came from, and also to the place that mostly profits from this settler colonial state that is now engaged in genocide, or as Jonathan very well phrased it, might have been involved in a slow genocide till now, where we have reached like a peak. We have a comment from Sam in the chat. It says Yael Khan has also said she grew up as a Zionist, but when she found out about the Nakba, she was horrified and became a lifelong campaigner against Zionism. I'm not familiar with Yael Khan, I will admit.
She's solid. She was. I mean, Jonathan, were you there when she was arrested at a week or two ago?
I left just before she was.
Oh, no way. Maybe you can
Yeah,
tell
but
us a little bit.
she's a force of nature, Yael. She's wonderful. She's very outspoken Israeli who is a committed anti-Zionist and who spoke very eloquently at the weekly picket against the Israeli ambassador in Swiss Cottage every Friday here in London, and was arrested under the Public Order Act because she made the comparison between Israel and the Nazis. And that's another whole topic we can talk about, which is part of the repression. I don't know, maybe you guys want to get into that at some point, but
there's a lot to discuss. I think
there's a lot to do.
Yeah. We want to make sure we have time to really get into the healthcare piece.
Sure.
But I would just say I'm glad that Sam wrote this in, because I think this is the experience of many of us, these moments, these turning points and eye-opening moments when we realize, oh, we're not just witness to this bloodthirsty entity destroying everything in its path on this extraordinary extermination campaign, but we are also complicit in it unless we stand up and reject it. And especially for Jewish people, this is where I get really activated, because I feel like it's not an option, it's a responsibility, and anything less than standing up and meeting that responsibility is a deep failure. So anyway, I mean, that I could talk about for a long time, and I think we do a lot of talking about that with iGen, but I do really want to get to the healthcare piece, because I think Jonathan has some super helpful perspectives and a lot of information there. I'd love to start by basically just giving a bit of an overview. I mean, we've talked about it, I think, in the last few weeks, what's gone on at Kamal Adwan Hospital and with Dr. Hussam Abu Sofia, but I think let's maybe just, Jonathan, if you can lay out this framework of healthcare under genocide, performing healthcare services and being medical professionals in genocide.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I think people will be familiar with the events at Kamal Adwan in the last few weeks. But of course, that, what happened there is the culmination of what has been a 15-month campaign to physically destroy the entire health service and to target healthcare workers in particular. I saw a statistic the other day, and I just can't find the source. So if anybody knows it, please shout. That healthcare workers are 3.5 times more likely to be killed in Gaza than other people in the population. So they are very much being targeted. And the reason they're being targeted and the hospitals are being targeted is not because Hamas has command and control centers in them, right? But because they are community hubs. They are a place that people see as safe, as bringing together all kinds of services. Like in Al-Shifa, the civil defense was stationed there. Some of the food vouchers were given out there for people to collect aid and all sorts of things like that. And the genocide is, the principal aim is to destroy any organization, any civil organization, and just to have complete chaos. So there's no protections, there's no services or anything like that. And that is why the hospitals have been a war aim or a genocide aim. It's wrong to call it a war because that gives the Israelis the excuse to use the Geneva Conventions and the prosecution of war, which they lie about all the time. They're following the rules of war. They're not. They're engaged in a genocide. So what we've seen over the last 15 months is one atrocity after another, one war crime after another within the health sector against hospitals. Earlier on this afternoon, just reading up a bit to prepare for this talk together, I was looking at a document I put together, I think it was in about February 2024, so nearly a year ago, just documenting what had happened in the hospitals within 3.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And, things like drones shooting people, healthcare staff in the operating theatre, operating on patients, tanks firing shells into maternity hospitals, murdering people as they come in and out of the main gate of the hospital, blowing up the water supply, the oxygen supply, the fuel depot, tanks driving over patients in the courtyard of a hospital, right? And they find the bodies later with still hooked up to IV drips and things like that. You name it, it goes on and on and on. The babies left in the incubators to die and starve to death. It's really traumatic and upsetting reading this stuff and writing about it. And, you have to sort of stop and take a break before you come back to it, to document it. And that's just reading it from a distance. And one can only imagine what it must be like having to experience that. So the hospitals have been, as I say, a principal aim of the genocide, and have also been the site of one of the worst collection of war crimes. I'm not saying it's only that, obviously, it's elsewhere. It's the destruction of schools and civil infrastructure and mosques and you name it. But I was very struck, for example, by the Al-Shifa massacre. And again, just to remind people that Al-Shifa was attacked 4 times altogether. And the last big attack was late March, early April, when they laid siege, carried out all the things I've mentioned and a whole lot more, invaded the hospital, marched people out, summary executions in the courtyard, in closed rooms, you name it, and then burnt out the whole hospital and buried hundreds and hundreds of people in mass graves. A Palestinian journalist said he thought that this was one of the worst massacres in Palestinian history. Something like 1,500 people, he estimated. Now, that's not verified and so on, but it gives you an indication of what has gone on in the hospitals. And Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis suffered similar fate. I think 2 or 3 months later, same thing. And mass graves found afterwards in the grounds of the hospital, with hundreds of bodies. So what happened in Kamal Adwan, therefore, was simply more of the same. But I think what's been going on in the north, and you guys, I'm sure, will have your perspective on this, is now a complete extermination, ethnic cleansing operation, quite determined, block by block, building by building. And Kamal Adwan is in the north. It's in Beit Hanun, I think. Am I right? Or Bet Lahia? Bet Lahia. And so it was, obviously next on the target list. So every building's being flattened. People are being driven out and cleansed of the area. And that was a quote in a Haaretz article from a commander on the ground. We're not here to retrieve the hostages. We're here to flatten, I'm paraphrasing, flatten every building and cleanse the area. He did use the word cleanse. So that's what happened with Kamal Adwan. They besieged the hospital. They killed the son of the director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, his 8-year-old son, to try and pressurize him still further to leave. He refused to leave. They then carried on the attacks. They drove out the patients, the healthcare staff, 240 of them, stripped half naked, marched off into captivity. And then he himself leaving the hospital last. And I don't know if you guys have managed to get that photograph we talked about earlier.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, if you could perhaps put that up. Him leaving the hospital and walking into Israeli captivity.
And I mean, this picture is kind of very symbolic of how dystopian this all sounds and it all looks. We have one man performing his duty, I think, under the Hippocratic oath that all doctors take to do no harm and to keep their patients alive, and to treat their patients, walking towards two just huge tanks of some sort that are responsible for all of this destruction, for all of the death that this brave doctor has been seeing every single day. And I do not. I think we've said this last time, me and Rachel, with Hiba, and we keep saying this. Dr. Hussam Abu Safia did not choose to be a hero. He just refused to. He just wanted to continue his duty as a healthcare professional, and he is being punished for it right now. I think we have some testaments from people who were with Dr. Hussam Abu Safia in State Iman, the torture camp that we have already heard reports about. And these people are saying that Dr. Hussam Abu Safia has been tortured every day and still is not released yet.
And actually, what they had, the Israelis actually released first. They insisted that they had no record of him, despite him clearly having been taken, and that having been confirmed by Palestinian eyewitnesses who were then released. Then they denied him legal representation or counsel or any contact with anyone outside, legal or not, which has been extended. He is still being denied any contact. And then they kept pushing that date, and now they've extended his detainment until, I believe, February 13th. And I mean, if you can imagine what happens in a month there, we've seen testimonies, we've heard them. We've actually seen the videos coming out of this concentration camp. in the middle of this Holocaust of people having been raped to death, doctors having been raped to death. So it's important that we have this here. It's important that we have the space to discuss this and to also point out, I would say, that Dr. Abu Sofia was very, very vocal. He had an Instagram following because he had been reporting himself the truth and his own accounts of what had been happening at Kamal Adwan Hospital for months. I mean, for the whole time, rather, the whole genocide. And he had received threats. That's also something that came out, I believe, after he had been kidnapped. He had received threats that if he didn't stop talking, if he didn't stop giving his accounts, then he would be targeted. And of course, he was.
I guess, Jonathan, that leaves me with one question. All of this, all of these attacks on the healthcare on healthcare workers as professionals, as people who are there to kind of be the healers or the people who attempt to keep Palestinians in Gaza that are being genocided right now alive. What do you see is the responsibility of healthcare workers globally? What are the demands? How can we push towards actual change, even in the healthcare field in our countries where we are?
A great question, Karam. I'm so pleased you asked that. I just wanted to go back very briefly to Dr. Abu Sofia and his detention. You know, he was arrested or detained at work, doing his job with patients, right? Can you imagine in Germany or in Britain or any European country if the military invaded that hospital and detained the hospital director? I mean, it would never happen. But I just want to pay tribute to him and to all the other Palestinian healthcare workers of all grades, not only doctors, nurses, ancillary workers, ambulance drivers, and so on. You know, they, as you say, they didn't set out to be heroes, but honestly, it is so humbling to see how committed Palestinian healthcare workers have been to their patients and their communities. They refuse to leave. They know very well what awaits them, and yet they stayed. They stayed with their patients. And there have been repeated statements by numerous Palestinian healthcare workers when they were asked, why don't you leave? And I remember one doctor, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name right now, said, what are you talking about? I spent 14 years training as a surgeon, and you want me to just go away now and leave my patients? No, we stay with our patients. We all remember that whiteboard with the sign saying, for those who survive, those are written by healthcare workers who knew that the IOF was coming to kill them. But yet they stay. And I mean, you couldn't have a better example of the oath that healthcare workers take to their patients, played out in real time, played out in such a extreme form. He said to me when I took the oath, when I qualified, would you stay with patients if there were tanks bombarding the hospital outside and telling you to leave? That didn't enter my head, of course. So, I think they are the heroes. They are so stalwart, and their commitment to their people and to resisting what is going on is so important. I think the signal that they give to their people, to the people of Palestine, that we will resist. Doesn't matter what they throw at us, we will resist, is so important. And then very quickly, sorry, I'll come to a question. On torture camps, Seder Teman, two of you probably know, I'm sure, that it's not the only one.
Yeah.
But Selem's report, the Israeli Human Rights Organization, think, listed about 15 prisons, which have become a network of torture and starvation, because the inmates are starved as well as tortured on a daily or every second day. It's like it's like a duty roster of who's going to be tortured today and at regular intervals. It's on an industrial scale what's happening. And it is so important that we highlight this and talk about it. So coming to the duty of healthcare workers globally, we must stand up and shout about this. We must speak out as individuals, but particularly as organizations. Now, as I alluded to earlier, unfortunately, here in the West, at least, our institutions basically agree with what our governments are doing and take the same position. After all, they are the elites, part of the elite of the society. And here in Britain, for example, we have a strong Zionist presence within the British Medical Association, for example, who successfully frustrated last year at our AGM a whole number of resolutions that were put forward. Dozens of resolutions by the membership were censured on the basis of, guess what? They're anti-Semitic. And the resolutions criticized Israel and the genocide. But they frustrated us from having a motion passed by the BMA criticizing Israel and the genocide, which would be very powerful as a well-known internationally organization. But we need all health organizations and institutions to do this. Where is the pediatricians shouting about Dr. Abu Safia's arrest? In fact, the Americans, I learned earlier today in another meeting, the American Academy or Association of Pediatrics has actually called for his release, which is great. But they are one of very few, and we need them to speak out, to condemn the genocide. And so, I would urge all health workers everywhere to, educate yourself on this. There's lots of information about it, but raise this in your organizations. Raise this within, if you remember if you're a gynecologist or you're a radiologist or a radiographer or a physio or an occupational therapist or whatever branch of healthcare you're in. And in fact, I would say still wider, raise it in your organizations, ask what the organization is doing and demand that they condemn the genocide and cut ties with Israel, both bilateral ties and kick them out of the international organizations. Francesca Albanese, a week ago or so, made that call because of the destruction of Kamal Adwan and the three other hospitals, 3 in total in the north. She called for a global medical boycott of Israel. This is what we have to do. This is what we aim for in South Africa as well. It was the total isolation of the regime. And in Israel, as you said, Karam, I think it will have major repercussions. So I think that's really, really important. And just to add, Health Workers for Palestine is a growing organization all over the world. More and more people are joining by the day. It's remarkable. I think health workers, because of the centrality of what's happening to the health service and health workers in Palestine, have been greatly mobilized and outraged and are speaking up in very large numbers and are getting increasingly organized. And what we are trying to do is to give voice to all those people and channel it into specific campaigns to take action against the regime, to isolate it. And it's very important. There's no fence to sit on here. There is no fence when it comes to a genocide. Either you're against the genocide, or as Archbishop Tutu said famously, if you don't speak out in the face of repression, you are on the side of the oppressor. And I think this applies in spades to what's going on at the moment in Palestine.
Yeah, That is.
I'm just happy to let that kind of settle, because I think in being in these spaces and in being in this struggle, that's something that we have to internalize into our bones.
Yeah. And, just to add, sorry, while you're taking a moment there, Rachel, our job as doctors, is not only to treat people who are ill and tend to their wounds in front of us. We need to address the causes of death and suffering and injury, right? And one of the really great comrades here in Britain, James Smith, who's a doctor who's been and worked in Gaza, he put this very well at a demonstration he spoke at, where he said we have to speak out against the causes of these things. And in Gaza and Palestine, it's the settler colonial project, it's the genocide, it's the racist regime there. This is what's causing people to become ill, just as apartheid was the cause of so much suffering and disease and death in South Africa. And as doctors, we have a duty to speak out against that, not to just, see the person in the consulting room. We must speak out against things that make our communities around us. And we're global now. It's a global community. That's why we need to all speak out against this. Thanks.
This is so helpful, and I think we're aware that this probably will spill into another session, because there's a lot to discuss here, and I do think that this topic of healthcare is enormously not just important but central, because of the reasons that we've discussed and because of the way it's being targeted as the core of life, kind of within the genocide. But for now, as we're ending, I just want to say, because we've been in touch about this discussion with certain healthcare groups in Germany as well. So to whoever is listening, or maybe whoever comes to visit this later, if you'd like to get involved, if you're a healthcare worker and you don't know exactly how, please write us. We will find ways for you to mobilize and activate and politicize. There is so much that you can do, and this is a really, really crucial place to start.
Great. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here.
We appreciate you.
This was very, very informative, and I think, as we said today, these kind of exchanges help us break out of our chains and decide how much we're willing to, how many privileges we're willing to lose in order to achieve full-on liberation. Thank you so much for walking us also through huge parts of your journey towards this kind of consciousness of collective liberation. I think this will be enlightening to many that listen to this. Thank you so much, and I hope you would come on maybe next time we talk more in detail about how to organize, and we can pick your brain on more specific things next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys, and just to say a big thanks to the two of you for putting together Exchained. I think it's a great initiative. I love the name, and these forums which spread the word out there to people are so important, and I think you've got a great thing going. So thanks so much for what you're doing too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a